Britain has entered uncharted waters. For weeks, the nation watched in silence as tension brewed between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace. But now that silence has been shattered. King Charles has just made a move so bold, so unprecedented, that it has thrown the entire British government into turmoil and left Prime Minister Keir Starmer fighting for political survival. After weeks of restraint, the monarch struck back, calmly, decisively, and with the precision of a man who understands both history and power. The impact of that one decision has sent shockwaves through Westminster, Parliament, and even across the Atlantic. Behind closed doors, the king had been watching, silent but alert. While Starmer's offhand remarks about the monarchy sparked outrage across the country, Charles remained composed. Newspapers blazed with headlines condemning Starmer's arrogance. Social media exploded with fury. Labour MPs panicked as public anger boiled over. But through it all, the king said nothing. Analysts called it strategy, a monarch playing the long game. They were right. But no one realized how devastating that silence would become. Late one night, reports began to surface, whispers from Balmoral Castle. The king had quietly summoned senior constitutional advisors and even retired military officials for an emergency briefing. The agenda was clear: to assess the limits of royal authority during times of national instability. This wasn't ceremony. It was crisis management. By dawn, a letter had been drafted, private, confidential, and addressed to the Speaker of the House of Commons. In calm, measured language, Charles expressed his grave concern over the Prime Minister's conduct and the growing erosion of Britain's constitutional balance. That letter was never meant to see daylight. And yet, within hours, it mysteriously leaked. When the press broke the story, London went into meltdown. Headlines screamed, "King intervenes, historic warning to Downing Street." Parliament froze. The public gasped. For the first time in living memory, a reigning monarch had stepped directly into the political arena, not with anger, but with authority. Inside Downing Street, panic erupted. Starmer's aides scrambled to contain the damage, calling it a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The palace confirmed the letter's authenticity, and its tone was unmistakable, polite but laced with quiet fury. "When respect for the crown falters," the king wrote, "so too does the trust that binds our nation together." It was a thunderclap wrapped in royal ink. Starmer's reaction was volcanic. According to insiders, he stormed out of a security briefing, slammed the door, and shouted, "He's trying to run the country from his castle." Ministers exchanged horrified looks. A witness described it simply: "We watched a man unravel." International media seized on the chaos. CNN called it the moment Britain's stability cracked. The New York Times wrote, "The monarch who never speaks has just made himself heard." And as the storm raged, another figure stepped into the spotlight: Nigel Farage. Within hours, Farage released a statement praising the king's courage and wisdom. Standing before a sea of Union Jacks, he declared, "At a time when our traditions are under attack, the king has reminded us who we are." The clip went viral. Millions shared it online, hailing Farage as the voice of common sense, the speech many said that Starmer should have given. Inside Labour, the walls were cracking. Senior ministers like Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner refused to stand beside the Prime Minister at public events. Meetings were held in private homes, away from cameras, to discuss how to save the party from total collapse. Whispers turned into strategy, and rebellion took form. Meanwhile, the king said nothing, not a word, not an appearance. He simply waited, an old man in Windsor Castle letting his prime minister burn in the fire he'd lit himself. But silence can be deafening. The British people began to ask not whether Charles had gone too far, but whether Starmer had fallen too low. Then came the speech, Starmer's desperate attempt to reclaim control. Against the advice of his aides, he appeared before cameras, standing stiffly outside Number 10. "The United Kingdom," he declared, "is governed by elected officials, not by monarchs, however well-intentioned. I serve the people, not the palace." It was meant to be defiant. Instead, it sounded like blasphemy, Within minutes, backlash exploded. "I respect the crown" trended across social media. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, waving flags and singing "God Save the King." Even non-royalists began to rally, not for monarchy, but against arrogance. Commentators called it the Night of the Divide, a moment when Britain split, not by class or party, but by loyalty to tradition or to defiance. By morning, the government was falling apart. Ministers resigned one after another. Labour's approval rating collapsed to its lowest level in history. The opposition united around one message: that Starmer had disrespected the very fabric of Britain, and through it all, the king stayed silent. Yet behind that silence, something extraordinary was unfolding. Palace insiders confirmed that Charles had been quietly meeting with senior church leaders, retired judges, and military veterans, figures of trust, guardians of tradition. He wasn't seizing power. He was steadying the nation. Even newspapers that had once mocked the monarchy now wrote glowing editorials: "Charles the Steady Hand, the King Britain needed." Meanwhile, Nigel Farage's Reform UK was surging. His rallies grew larger, his speeches sharper. "When a Prime Minister mocks the King," he told a roaring Birmingham crowd, "he mocks the soul of Britain itself." Polls shifted overnight. Reform UK overtook Labour in several key constituencies. Farage, once seen as a fringe populist, was suddenly a credible contender for Downing Street. As the crisis deepened, Labour's internal revolt ignited. Angela Rayner, once Starmer's deputy, began quietly rallying MPs behind her. Rachel Reeves stepped aside and threw her support behind Rayner's call for unity. The coup was on. Across London, cameras flashed as resignation letters hit the press faster than Starmer could read them. Sky News called it a government imploding in slow motion. And then, the palace made its move. A royal address was announced. For the first time in decades, the monarch would speak directly to the nation. The last time such an address had been made outside wartime was during the Gulf conflict. The gravity was unmistakable. At precisely 8 p.m., the royal insignia appeared across every television in Britain. King Charles sat at his desk in Windsor Castle, calm, deliberate, unshaken. "At moments of uncertainty," he began, "we must remember that our nation's strength lies not in anger but in unity. The crown exists not to rule but to serve. And in serving, we safeguard the stability our ancestors built with duty and sacrifice." He never mentioned Starmer. He didn't have to. "I ask all who lead," he continued, "to conduct themselves with respect for tradition, for the people, and for the institutions that bind this kingdom together." It was the most surgical rebuke in modern history, delivered with grace and received with thunderous silence. Within minutes, social media erupted. Clips of the speech flooded every platform. Headlines read, "The Monarch Speaks for Britain." Even critics called it the speech of a statesman. Inside number 10, Starmer sat wordless, staring at the screen. An aide later revealed he knew it was over. By morning, the numbers confirmed it. Labour's support had collapsed below 20%. Reform UK surged to 25%. And for the first time, polls showed more Britons trusted the king to stabilize the country than their own government. Foreign media dubbed it the Charles Doctrine, a reassertion of moral authority in a time of political chaos. The Le Monde headline simply read, "When the crown outshines the government." Even Commonwealth leaders spoke out. Canada and Australia praised Charles's calm leadership. It was, in every sense, a royal renaissance. By the week's end, resignations flooded in. Starmer's cabinet collapsed. Angela Rayner was seen leaving late-night meetings, not of rebellion, but of succession. Inside Labour HQ, aides packed boxes. The Prime Minister's resignation letter was drafted but never delivered. He refused to kneel, even as history closed in around him, and so Britain entered another uneasy dawn, one defined not by parties, but by principles. Across the nation, millions stood once more behind the monarchy, not out of nostalgia, but necessity. In a time of division, the king had reminded his people of something far older than politics, that Britain's endurance lies in continuity, not chaos. For Keir Starmer, it was the end of an era. For Nigel Farage, the beginning of one. And for King Charles, perhaps the defining moment of his reign. Because in the quiet war between power and tradition, between arrogance and dignity, one truth had been made clear. Silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. The king had spoken once, and that was enough.